Welcome into TYT, The Conversation. I'm your host, Adrienne Lawrence, and I am joined by a revolutionary woman. She's out here doing everything. This is columnist for The Nation and director of Make It Right Project, Callie Holloway. Callie, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's been wild, though, as we know, with everything going on with the Trump administration, fortunately coming to a close. And I know you wrote a recent piece for The Nation where you elaborated on Trump's strategy really being about leveraging psychological pain and mental terror. So, Callie, what do you mean by that?
I think that we often think of the trauma that results from Trump's policymaking as kind of this unforeseen thing, right? That trauma is the result of the policies that they put in place. But the reality is, Trump is actually starting from a place of wanting to create trauma, right? And so that became a lot more apparent with some recent revelations about the DOJ and its involvement in family separation. Jeff Sessions and his deputy, Jeff Sessions at the time was the AG, his deputy, Rod Rosenstein, were very active in pushing this idea that we should separate families and that we should separate parents from children regardless of their age. And we know that some of the conversations that they had specifically centered on the fact that this would cause psychological trauma and psychological harm. The idea was that they would create so much psychic trauma that it would dissuade future immigrant flows. So we have to think about the policymaking of this administration as being rooted in a kind of creating of widespread trauma. It's not an unintentional after effect, right? It is the strategy itself.
And it's really interesting that you say that because I definitely feel like I've gone through a traumatic last 3.5+ years, just by virtue of the fact that we're at the whim of what seems to be a madman. And I know that in your piece, you had said that trauma isn't an unforeseen byproduct of Trumpism. And so how do you think that this experience of going through the Trump administration will impact us in the long term?
I think that we are going to be seeing this for a very long time, kind of the after effect of the trauma that we've dealt with. Look, we're a nation that has been at war for 18 years. 9/11 obviously impacted us. We had the financial crash. And we've spent the last 4 years with a president who has created news at a breakneck speed. It feels like every single day is a new affront. This isn't obviously where trauma began. I mentioned in the piece that there were 2 polls before the election that showed that specifically Black women were very wary. They were the group that was most concerned about the kind of outsized damage that this administration could cause. I know that when I was saying some of this stuff, people treated me as if I was being hysterical. And it turned out that he absolutely did everything that I thought he would do and beyond. So I think that there is going to be a lot of work that we have to do. I know that psychologists, even before the election, the 2016 election, talked about the increase in the number of patients that they had who very specifically related their anxiety and depression to the potential for a Trump presidency. 4 years of this has worn on all of us. Social media hasn't helped. So, I think that we're all going to have to do a lot of work to repair the damage that has been done and that has intentionally been done because it's there to fatigue you, right? That is part of the work that they are doing is to make us tired, right? To make us exhausted. In the long term, I think that beyond the next presidency for years into the future, we're going to be dealing with the mess that this administration has made.
Yes, very much so. And, it seems that we're also very exhausted, even just coming off of this 2020 presidential election. And I know that you wrote an op-ed for the Daily Beast that was released on Election Day, where you kind of talked about white women as voters and the fact that, hey, they got us Trump, so they're not really going to be part of, the brigade to get rid of him. And many of us were hoping things had changed, but then we got to see really with these exit polls that 55% of white women voted for Trump in this election, which was an increase from 2016. It seems that you had that knowledge and that forecasting. Why do you think more white women were backing Trump this time than 2016?
Well, let me say something really quickly. So that piece was released, it was published on election day, but I actually wrote it days before the election because I kept seeing these pieces that predicted that white women were essentially going to en masse defect from Trumpism. This is the same kind of thing that I saw in 2016. There were a lot of predictions coming out of, I mentioned this, lily white newsrooms, where people said that there was maybe going to be potentially the largest gender gap in voting in history, right? White women weren't supposed to get on the Trump train. That's the kind of predictions that we saw. And we know at that point, a plurality of white women, 47%, supported Trump. So when I started seeing these editorials and these polls, I knew that that wasn't going to be the outcome. I think historically, if you have any sense of history, you know that white women stand at a very interesting intersection, right? They are granted privilege by whiteness, but their powers are diminished by misogyny. But they have consistently voted for and supported white supremacy instead of gender or racial parity. So I did not think there was going to be a difference in this election. Sometimes you make these kind of predictions and you hope that you're going to be wrong. But clearly, white women looked at this administration and all the destruction that it has caused, including to white women, right? And said that it was important enough for them to protect white supremacy. The benefits of white supremacy apparently outweighed the downsides of misogyny for them.
Yikes, that's a damning statement, but it is a very accurate one, which is very unfortunate. But hey, this is where we are. And you had mentioned, yeah, exactly. And you mentioned misogyny. And so we know that white women generally have been condemned a lot more for voting what they'd say is against their interests when they vote for Trump. But seldom do we really talk about white men being, and they don't receive the same level of rebuke for their actions. Right. So this time around, we saw fewer white men voting for Trump with 63%. But even so, why do you think that white men aren't getting called out as much or are getting the pass?
I think that there is, sadly, I think that there is, we don't expect much from white men, to be frank. We don't expect for them to vote against their primary interest, which is white supremacy. There is this expectation that white women, because they experience some version of marginalization, that they would align with other groups that experience it, right? As a way of helping do away with it. I think we have to start thinking about the project of white supremacy as a group project. That white men and white women are working on together. Unfortunately, that's where we are. We have to actually, I think, one of the important things about talking about the way these things shake out in voting is that we also have to stop pretending to be shocked by it.
Yeah, I would like to think probably you and I are not shocked by it, but it seems that a number of people in society continue to say, "Oh, wow, I thought we were post-racialism." But nope, not necessarily the case. And I do want to definitely talk a little bit about your work as the director of the Make It Right project. And I know that was kind of just a limited campaign, but extremely impactful. And so can you share with people kind of really what made Make It Right different from other organizations?
I think we launched in June of 2018. And at that point, there were definitely local groups that were working on taking down Confederate monuments. I think the work of taking down Confederate monuments is often very localized because of the way that laws work. But there wasn't a group that was sort of forming the connective tissue between those groups around the country. There was sort of no national group that was sort of doing the effort around the country and trying to connect folks. So we decided to pick up that mantle, and it was an awesome opportunity to work with historians, to work with activists who were already doing that work on the ground, to work with artists. I got the opportunity to work with politicians who were on our side, who were like-minded. So it was just a really great opportunity to also go in and elevate some of the work that was already being done. We initially had 10 targeted monuments. 4 of those are still standing. The rest of those have come down. Obviously, what was a hugely impactful event was the resistance that we saw this summer. But it was amazing to just kind of see the way that people were galvanized around, look, we have a lot of conversations about doing away with white supremacy and dismantling racism, right? And if we are not ready to take down Confederate monuments, which are frankly sort of the lowest hanging fruit, then there's no way we can have a more nuanced conversation about taking racism apart.
No, you're absolutely right. In terms of lowest hanging fruit, it's like we're we're going out of our way to celebrate the losers, the people who are trying to dismantle our democracy, only so we can advance racism. Like, it makes no sense whatsoever. So I am very, very happy to hear that Make It Right has invested that time. And I know we don't have that much time left, but I wanted to ask you, Callie, how is kind of like the experience of being in this space where you are not only doing the activist work, but then you're also reporting on it or sharing your knowledge and information? What has that been like for you over this past year of 2020, which has been a year of absolute turmoil?
Well, 2020 has been a little weird because a lot of the work that I was doing with folks who were organizing on the ground, there wasn't the opportunity to sort of travel and do a lot of that work because we've been in a pandemic for 8 months, right? That was pretty magic. It's been a lot more. I've turned a lot more to just pure journalism and just kind of highlighting their work through writing. And I do believe that writing is fighting, but I always, doff my hat to the folks that are actually on the streets, because I feel like a lot of change comes from there. So I've learned a lot of lessons, but mostly just trying to highlight what they're doing, because I think it's absolutely critical to creating change.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Callie.
Thank you.
Where can people find you?
I am a regular columnist for The Nation every month. I write a lot for the Daily Beast, and my handle on Twitter is @CallieHollowayFTW.
Thank you so much, Callie.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.